There are so many mental models out there that not knowing which to use becomes a problem in itself. So, which ones actually help you think clearer, outsmart any challenge, and create easy solutions for hard problems? Here's the truth: the 1% don't use hundreds of models to make smart decisions. They use a core set they understand deeply and apply consistently. This book breaks down 21 powerful mental models you can use right away to trust your judgment, solve problems with confidence, and avoid making poor decisions that create more problems over time. Introduction.
In the Map of Strategy, we explore 7 core domains of strategic thinking, as if they were regions on a map. Each region represents a set of mental models and tools that help the 1%, the best thinkers in the world, solve problems from different angles. The regions will have definitions, iconic examples, and talk about the history of the mental models. Chapter 1. Region 1. First Principles and Structured Clarity. First Principles and Structured Clarity is all about breaking things down to the basics and making sure everything is clearly laid out. It means asking why over and over until you get to the core truths, like starting from scratch, the way a scientist might. This approach is super helpful for solving messy problems because it clears out all the noise and helps you think in a fresh, focused way. By defining what things really mean, cutting out the fluff, and zeroing in on what truly matters, you get a clear view of the problem. That kind of clarity makes it way easier to find the right solution and avoids getting tripped up by bad assumptions later on. First principles thinking. This breaks a problem down to its most basic truths, facts that can't be reduced any further, and then rebuilding your solution from the ground up. Instead of relying on assumptions, traditions, or how things have always been done, you ask, what do I know for sure? What am I assuming? Elon Musk famously applied first principles thinking to cut the cost of space rockets. Instead of accepting that rockets must be expensive, he broke a rocket down into raw materials, aluminum, titanium, etc., and calculated that the commodity costs were only a fraction of the price, leading him to build rockets from scratch at a much lower cost. First principles thinking asks, what do we absolutely know is true? And builds up from there, as Aristotle originally suggested. Use this when you're stuck, facing a complex challenge, or trying to create something original instead of copying what already exists. Inversion. This mental model urges you to solve problems backwards or think about the opposite of what you want. As strategist Carl von Clausewitz said, invert, always invert, a principle later popularized by investor Charlie Munger. Instead of asking, how do we ensure success, inversion asks, what would guarantee failure, and then avoids those factors. For example, rather than only plotting how to grow your business, also ask, what might cause this business to collapse? Identifying those potential pitfalls like losing customer trust, running out of cash, highlights key issues to address. Inversion often uncovers hidden assumptions and errors. The Stoics practiced a form of inversion with the premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, imagining everything that could go wrong so they could plan to prevent it. This approach yields clarity by illuminating problems from the opposite direction. Use this when you're planning something important, solving a tricky problem, or trying to reduce risk in blind spots. Fermi estimation. Fermi estimation is a technique for making fast, rough guesses using logic and simple assumptions, especially when you don't have exact data. Named after physicist Enrico Fermi, it's about breaking big questions into smaller, more manageable parts to calculate estimations for large or uncertain values. For instance, you're thinking about starting a local dog walking service and wonder, is there even enough demand? You estimate how many homes are in your area, say 5,000. What percent own dogs? Maybe 30%. What percent of those might pay for walking? Maybe 10%. That gets you to roughly 150 potential clients. You didn't need perfect data, you needed a directionally smart guess. Fermi estimation is widely used in business and science to sanity check ideas or when precise data is unavailable. Use this when you need a ballpark answer quickly, whether for planning, forecasting, or gut checking, whether an idea is even worth pursuing. The ideas in the first principles and structured clarity region have been around for a long time. The concept of first principles dates all the way back to ancient Greece. Aristotle called them the basic building blocks of knowledge. Later, René Descartes took a similar approach with his method of systematic doubt, stripping away assumptions until he got to what he could absolutely trust. This way of thinking keeps coming back whenever big innovation happens, like when Gutenberg broke down how to replicate books and invented the printing press, or when Elon Musk looked at rocket building from scratch instead of accepting industry norms. Another powerful tool, inversion, basically solving a problem by flipping it around, was championed by 19th century mathematician Carl Jacobi, who famously said, "Invert, always invert." It's a smart move when you're stuck. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" you ask, "How do I make sure I fail?" and avoid those things. Fermi estimation got its name from physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously estimated the power of an atomic blast during the World War II using nothing but flying paper scraps. A clever way to get rough answers with limited info. All these tools, old and new, remind us that in 2025 and beyond, clarity is still king. The person who can break a messy problem into clean parts, get to the root cause, and think clearly about what matters most is almost always the person who figures out the solution first. Chapter 2, Region 2, Systems and Consequences. Systems and consequences is all about seeing the big picture, how everything connects and how one change can set off a chain reaction. It's where you ask questions like, if I do this, what happens next? Some choices seem smart in the moment but cause problems later, and this way of thinking helps you avoid those traps. This approach teaches you to spot patterns, follow cause and effect loops, and think through how your decisions will ripple through a system over time. It's not just about the first result, but the second, third, and beyond. You learn to tell the difference between things that build momentum and things that burn out or bounce back. It also helps you figure out where small actions can lead to big changes, and where pushing harder might actually hurt more than help. And because not all systems are the same, some are stable, some chaotic, it teaches you when to stick to best practices, when to experiment, and when to take fast, bold action. In short, this is strategic thinking with depth. You're not just solving a problem, you're making sure your solution doesn't create new ones down the line. Second-order thinking. This mental model means looking past the first, obvious outcome of a decision and then asking what happens next. It's the habit of considering not just the immediate effect, but the ripple effects, unintended consequences, and long-term trade-offs. Consider the infamous Cobra bounty in colonial Delhi. City officials, eager to cut a surge in venomous snakes, paid cash for every dead cobra brought to them. First-order logic said the financial incentive would slash the population. Second-order reality was very different. Enterprising residents began breeding cobras simply to kill them for the reward. When authorities discovered the scheme and canceled the program, breeders, now stuck with worthless stock, released the snakes. Net result? More cobras than before and a wasted budget. In personal life, second-order thinking is like considering the 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years impact of a decision. Great strategists like chess masters excel at this. They don't just plan the next move, but several moves ahead, evaluating each branch of consequences. Use it when making decisions that feel good in the short term but may carry hidden cost, or when you need to anticipate how a choice will play out over time. Systems mapping. This mental model is a way of visually laying out the parts of a system, how things influence each other directly or indirectly. Imagine this: you're constantly overwhelmed at work. You map it out and realize taking on too many tasks leads to late nights, which leads to poor sleep, which reduces focus, causing you to fall behind and say yes to even more tasks to catch up. That's a reinforcing loop. Once you see it, you can break the cycle, like setting boundaries or delegating early. By visualizing such interactions between variables, how A influences B, strategists can see the structure of complex problems. Use this when you're dealing with a messy, recurring issue, something that doesn't have a clear cause but keeps showing up in patterns. Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. This pops up everywhere. The Pareto principle states that roughly 80% of results come from 20% of the effort. In other words, a small number of inputs usually drive the majority of outcomes, whether it's revenue, progress, or problems. In a business, 20% of products might generate 80% of the profits. In customer support, a few recurring issues cause most complaints. Vilfredo Pareto first noticed it in wealth distribution. A small percent of people held most wealth. And since then, it's been observed in software bugs, the majority of crashes caused by a few lines of code. And even time management. We often get the majority of our important work done in a small fraction of our day. The takeaway for problem solvers is to find the high-impact inputs. If you can identify which key factors are driving outcomes, you can prioritize your efforts on that critical 20%. It's a reminder to view the system as a whole, but focus on the parts that matter most. A strategic lens for efficiency. Law of diminishing returns. This says that after a certain point, adding more effort, time, or resources gives you less and less benefit in return. What worked at first starts to lose its edge, and pushing harder stops being worth it. Picture a farmer adding fertilizer to a field. The first sack of fertilizer makes a big difference in crop yield. The second sack still helps, but less so. By the 10th sack, additional fertilizer might barely increase yield or even harm the soil. This is diminishing returns in action. Beyond an optimal point, each additional input produces a smaller, incremental benefit. Recognizing this law helps strategists avoid overinvesting in one area. Use this when you're stuck polishing, tweaking, or grinding away at something that's already good enough, especially when that extra 10% effort only gets you 1% more results. Systems thinking really started to take off as its own field in the mid-1900s. A biologist named Ludwig von Bertalanffy kicked things off in the 1940s with general systems theory. His big insight? Whether you're looking at living organisms or entire societies, they all follow some of the same underlying patterns. Later on, we saw this kind of thinking make a real-world splash with the Limits to Growth report from the Club of Rome. They used systems models to show how nonstop economic growth could eventually push Earth's resources to the breaking point, surfacing second and third order effects way before they were trendy. The Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, has been around since economist Vilfredo Pareto noticed that 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the people. But it wasn't until after World War II that it became famous in business and quality control as the idea of the vital few and trivial many. These days, it's everywhere, from how we think about customer impact to how we manage our time. Another classic is the law of diminishing returns. It comes from economics, but you'll see it show up in modern situations too. Like in tech, where adding more servers to your system doesn't always give you proportionate performance gains. Eventually, every extra input gives you less output. Fast forward to now in 2025, and systems thinking is more important than ever. We live in a world that's tightly connected, constantly shifting, and sometimes downright chaotic. Whether we're dealing with climate change, global supply chains, or public health crises, solving big problems means looking at how everything connects. Even in day-to-day work, like fixing a broken workflow or predicting how a market might react, being able to think in terms of feedback loops, ripple effects, and unintended consequences has become a signature move of a sharp, strategic thinker. Chapter 3. Region. 3. Decision dynamics and probabilistic thinking. Decision dynamics and probabilistic thinking is all about making smart choices when things are uncertain and understanding the trade-offs that come with every option. In this space, you're not just picking what feels right in the moment. You're asking questions like, what am I giving up by choosing this? What are the risks and potential rewards? What are the odds something goes really right or really wrong? This way of thinking sharpens 3 key instincts. First, it helps you see trade-offs clearly, knowing that saying yes to one thing means saying no to others, and that comes with hidden costs. Second, it teaches you to size up risks, figuring out where it's safe to take a hit and where the big wins might be hiding. Third, it's about staying flexible, making moves that let you adjust, grow, or exit as things change, instead of locking yourself into a rigid plan. All of this builds a strategy that's not just smart, it's resilient. You leave room for mistakes, save energy and resources for the big opportunities, and keep your options open. Even when the future's unclear, you're set up to adapt and win when it counts. The barbell strategy. This mental model involves balancing extreme safety and extreme risk simultaneously, avoiding the middle of moderate risk. One end of the barbell might be 90% of your portfolio in ultra-safe assets like cash or treasury bonds, and the other end 10% in very volatile bets like startups or crypto. If the risky bets all fail, you only lose a small portion, and your core 90% is safe. But if one hits big, the upside is huge. This approach has been used beyond investing. For example, you work a stable 9-to-5 job that pays the bills. That's your safe side. But instead of dabbling in low-return side gigs, you dedicate nights and weekends to a bold business idea with highly lucrative potential. You're not relying on it to survive, but if it works, it could change everything. That's the barbell in action. It's a high uncertainty strategy that protects the downside while keeping upside alive. Opportunity cost. This is the hidden price you pay when you choose one option over another. It's what you give up by saying yes. Every decision has a trade-off, even if you don't see it. It's Friday night and you decide to binge a new Netflix series. Nothing wrong with unwinding, but the opportunity cost might be the 3 hours you could have used to build your business, design your website, or brainstorming next steps for your venture. The show is entertaining, but it comes at the cost of momentum and achieving your dreams. Opportunity cost is the foregone benefit from the option you didn't choose. The 1% always ask, what else could we do with these resources, and is that better? By explicitly weighing alternatives, you avoid the trap of doing something just because you can, when something else would be a smarter move. Margin of safety. This is the practice of building an extra room, time, money, energy, or resources. So if things go wrong, you don't fall apart. It's a buffer between your plan and real-world chaos. This concept comes from investor Benjamin Graham, but it applies widely. Imagine an engineer designing a bridge that can handle 100 tons when the expected max load is 70 tons. That 30-ton buffer is the safety margin. In business, if a project needs at least 1,000 customers to break even, a manager with a margin of safety mindset will aim for a plan that likely brings in 1,000, 500, or 2,000, so that even if things go wrong, they won't dip into losses. It's essentially building a cushion against errors or bad luck. Warren Buffett describes it as not picking up pennies in front of a steamroller, instead only stepping into deals where the odds are heavily in your favor. By expecting the unexpected, you design strategies that can absorb shocks. Margin of safety protects you from overconfidence and keeps small mistakes from becoming big failures. Optionality. Optionality is the practice of designing your life, work, or strategy in a way that keeps your options open, so you're never locked into one path too early. The more high-quality options you have, the more you can adapt, seize upside, and avoid regret. Think about moving to a new city. You may not be ready to commit. So instead of signing a lease or quitting your job, you take a 2-week trip there, work remotely, and explore the neighborhoods. You're giving yourself a low-risk way to learn more before making a big decision, and keeping your options open the whole time. Optionality helps smart thinkers stay agile, make better long-term bets, and let life's best doors stay open until it's time to walk through. Use this when making long-term plans, starting something new, or navigating uncertain environments where flexibility is power. A lot of the mental models in the decision dynamics domain come from economics and finance. Take opportunity cost. It was formally defined in the late 1800s by economists like Friedrich von Wieser, but the idea is ancient. Even Ben Franklin's time is money is basically an opportunity cost lesson. And it's still everywhere today. Whether you're a student choosing between studying and working, or a CEO deciding between 2 investments, you're constantly weighing what you're giving up when you choose one option over another. The barbell strategy is a newer idea from finance that really took off after the 2008 crash. It's all about being anti-fragile. Put most of your resources in something super safe, and then place small, high-risk bets that could really pay off. People now use that same thinking for careers too. Keep a steady job, but also chase a bold side hustle. Optionality, a big buzzword in the 2010s, basically rebrands the old "don't put all your eggs in one basket" advice. But in today's world, with gig work, startups, and tech changes happening fast, having options isn't just nice, it's survival. Whether it's asking, what's the opportunity cost of staying offline? Or do we have a backup if this strategy flops? Or should we build in some buffer just in case? These questions are everywhere now. Decision dynamics is really the logic engine of strategy. It helps you think through trade-offs, risks, and outcomes in a clear-headed way. In a world that keeps throwing curveballs, these mental models are more important than ever. Chapter 4, Region 4, Game Theory and Adversarial Strategy. Game theory and adversarial strategy is about treating every decision like a game with other players, not a solo project. Your outcome depends on what they do next, so you learn to read incentives, predict moves, and set the pace. In practice, you map where allies and rivals are naturally pulled, wargame your plan against sabotage, freeloaders, and surprise alliances, and design a strategy that holds up over many rounds, not just the first move. You treat wins and losses as feedback between your actions and everyone else's. Look for hidden leverage where you can nudge the rules or reframe the story, and run what-if rehearsals to spot blind spots before your opponents do. The mindset is simple. Think like your toughest rival, expect pushback, and build a plan that still works when things go sideways. Because almost nothing happens in a vacuum, mastering adversarial strategy means preparing not only for when things go right, but especially for when someone tries to knock your plan off course. Game theory. This mental model requires you to know your enemy, how your choices interact with other people's choices. Here's an example. You're buying a car. Instead of just asking for a discount, you think like the salesman. He's on commission, it's the end of the month, and future buyers are uncertain. So you offer cash, an amount lower than the retail price, and say you're ready to buy today, knowing that a guaranteed sale now is more valuable to him than holding out. You frame your offer to align with his incentives. This models many real-world situations, from price wars to arms races. Game theory provides a language to analyze these standoffs and to predict or prescribe optimal moves. Use this when dealing with competition, negotiation, collaboration, or any situation where others' moves affect your outcome. Pre-mortems. Pre-mortems, introduced by psychologist Gary Klein, are thought exercises where you imagine your plan has already failed. Then work backward to figure out why. You're about to launch a new online course. Before going live, you do a pre-mortem. It's 6 months later and this flopped? What went wrong? You uncover weak email marketing, poor messaging, and a clunky sign-up flow. Then you plan to prevent those. Those early insights save you from a costly misfire. More importantly, a pre-mortem differs from routine risk assessment by assuming failure has happened. This removes ego and positivity bias and encourages more candid, creative thinking about threats. It's effectively an adversarial strategy tool because it forces you to take the adversary position against your own plan. Use this before launching a project, making a big decision, or committing serious time and resources, especially when overconfidence or blind spots are likely. Scenario planning. Scenario planning is the practice of imagining multiple possible futures, best case, worst case, and everything in between, so you can be ready, not just reactive. Strategic foresight takes it further by identifying trends, signals, and early warnings to help you make smart moves before things shift. You're thinking about quitting your job to go full-time on your creative business. Instead of betting everything on one outcome, you plan for 3. It takes off, it grows slowly, or it flops. You prep your savings, build a freelancing backup, and map a runway. That way, you're not gambling. You're strategically prepared. Each scenario is not a prediction, but a what-if narrative. It's a bit like choose your own adventure for strategy, pushing you to stretch thinking beyond the most likely future into a range of futures. It's about preparing, not predicting. Use this when you're making long-term decisions, entering uncertain territory, or want to build plans that hold up even if things change. Game theory officially kicked off in 1944 with the book Theory of Games and Economic Behavior by von Neumann and Morgenstern. But it really took off during the Cold War, especially when strategists started applying it to nuclear standoffs, like the chilling idea of mutually assured destruction. Since then, game theory has become a go-to lens for thinking about competition, negotiations, and high-stakes decision-making. Pre-mortems are a newer concept. Around 2007, psychologist Gary Klein came up with the idea. Instead of waiting for a project to fail and doing a post-mortem, imagine up front that it already failed. Then work backward to figure out why. It's caught on fast, especially in project management and business strategy, because it forces teams to be honest about blind spots and possible pitfalls before they get burned. Scenario planning, famously developed by Pierre Wack at Shell in the 60s and 70s, helped leaders think through different possible futures, especially in volatile industries. Today, it's used to plan for everything from climate change to tech disruption. All of this lives under the umbrella of game theory and adversarial strategy. And in a world that's fast, competitive, and noisy, being able to anticipate moves, prepare for threats, and control the narrative isn't optional. It's essential. Chapter 5. Region 5. Cognitive upgrades and bias correction. Cognitive upgrades and bias correction is all about sharpening the most important tool you have, your own mind. Before you solve any problem out there, you've got to make sure your thinking isn't tripping you up. This means becoming more self-aware, spotting your blind spots, and noticing when emotions or overconfidence are clouding your judgment. It's about pausing to ask, am I seeing this clearly or just seeing what I want to see? Instead of blindly trusting your instincts, you learn to question assumptions, lean on real evidence, and look at things from multiple angles. The goal is to build a thinking style that's flexible, grounded, and resistant to bias. One that favors clarity over ego and truth over comfort. Because no matter how smart your strategy looks on paper, if your mind is running on faulty logic or hidden bias, you're going to miss something important. This domain keeps your mental lens clean, so you're not just thinking hard, you're thinking right. Cognitive bias audits. Cognitive biases are mental shortcuts that often lead us to flawed decisions, like overvaluing first impressions, which is called the halo effect, only noticing what confirms your beliefs, otherwise known as confirmation bias, or surrendering to sun fallacy after sticking with bad choices because you've already invested time or money. Debiasing is the practice of recognizing and correcting those distortions. Consider working on a project that's clearly not working, but you've already spent weeks on it. That's sunk cost bias. You feel pressure to keep going just because you've already invested time. A quick bias audit helps you name the bias, step back, and ask, would I start this today if I hadn't already spent time on it? That clarity lets you pivot sooner. For personal decisions, a simple bias audit might be keeping a decision journal. You write down major decisions, why you made them, and later the outcome. Over time, you might discover I often overestimate benefits and underestimate costs, planning fallacy, or I give too much weight to recent events versus older data, recency bias. Asking yourself, could a bias be influencing me here? Help you spot and patch mental blind spots before they cost you. Lindy effect. The Lindy effect says the longer something has been around, the longer it's likely to keep being around. In other words, ideas, books, or practices that have stood the test of time are more likely to survive than trendy, unproven ones. You're deciding between reading a newly released book about a skill or topic you want to learn, or a classic book that people always turn to. The new one is flashy, but the classic has been read and recommended for decades. The Lindy effect suggests the older book has lasting value and is more likely to still be useful now and for years to come. Lindy counters shiny object syndrome by giving weight to longevity. It's not perfect. Not everything old is gold. But as a mental model, it reminds us that survival over time is evidence of a proven track record. Use this when choosing what to study, build upon, or trust, especially when seeking timeless insight over fleeting hype. 6 thinking hats. 6 thinking hats is a method that separates different types of thinking into 6 hats, like logic, emotion, creativity, caution, optimism, and process. So a group can explore an idea from every angle without clashing. It helps teams shift from argument mode to collaborative problem solving. You're brainstorming a fictional story with a group of writers, but everyone keeps talking over each other. So you apply the 6 thinking hats. One person shares wild plot twists, green hat. Another flags emotional depth, red hat. Someone highlights story logic, white hat. And someone else points out risks and cliches, black hat. By organizing your thinking this way, your team stays focused, creative, and productive, without stepping on each other's ideas. By separating these modes, Six Hats avoids the chaos of arguments and encourages full spectrum thinking, systematically covering facts, positives, negatives, feelings, and ideas. Use this when group discussions get chaotic, decisions feel one-sided, or you need to unlock creative and well-rounded solutions as a team. A lot of what we know about cognitive biases came out of groundbreaking work in the late 20th century when psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed that people don't always think rationally. We rely on mental shortcuts that often lead to predictable mistakes, like anchoring or availability bias. By the 2000s, their ideas hit the mainstream, and suddenly, everyone from CEOs to students was talking about decision-making traps. As our world becomes more complex and overloaded with data, spotting and correcting these mental glitches has only gotten more important. Tools like Six Thinking Hats, created by Edward de Bono in 1985, were designed to help with this. Originally aimed at boosting creativity in business, it's still used today in meetings and workshops to help teams think more clearly and from multiple perspectives. Some schools even teach it to kids now to strengthen their critical thinking. Then there's the Lindy effect, a quirky but useful idea that came out of media circles in New York. It says the longer something has been around, the more likely it is to stick around. That's why old school stuff like vinyl records, classic books, or Stoic philosophy often makes a comeback. In an age of fads and flash-in-the-pan trends, Lindy thinking helps us spot what's built to last. Put it all together, and this whole domain is about sharpening your mind and learning to think more clearly. We've gone from being unaware of our mental blind spots to actively trying to fix them. And once you realize your brain is a tool, one that needs tuning just like any other, you start treating your thinking with the care it deserves. Chapter 6. Region 6. Creative Strategy and Ideation Engines. Creative strategy and ideation engines is where creativity becomes a skill, not just a lucky spark. Instead of sitting around waiting for inspiration to strike, this way of thinking gives you tools and habits to generate fresh ideas on purpose whenever you need them. It's about breaking out of the usual patterns, setting just enough limits to fuel creativity, and feeding your brain new inputs to spark unexpected connections. Think idea sprints, long walks, mixing ideas from totally different fields, whatever keeps your mind loose and playful. Then, once the ideas are flowing, you sort through them, sharpen the good ones, and test fast to see what works. The goal is simple: let your imagination run free first, then narrow your focus and make something real. This kind of creative strategy isn't about being more clever, it's about doing things differently and finding better, bolder solutions the world hasn't seen yet. Constraint-driven ideation. It's well known that sometimes creativity loves constraints. Constraint-driven ideation is the practice of using limits, like time, budget, tools, or rules, to spark creativity instead of stifling it. When resources are scarce, your brain is forced to find smarter, leaner, more inventive solutions. A famous example comes from Dr. Seuss, who wrote Green Eggs and Ham after his publisher bet he couldn't write a book with only 50 distinct words. That constraint led to one of the best-selling children's books ever. During hackathons, teams are given 24 hours to build something, and amazing projects are often built because the constraint forces focus and unconventional shortcuts. Research backs up that moderate constraints, whether resource, time, or specification constraints, can increase creative output by forcing people to reframe the problem and come up with novel approaches. When you feel stuck, add a constraint or tighten one. It seems counterintuitive, but it can jolt you out of habitual thinking and unlock focus, speed, and originality. Combinatorial creativity. Combinatorial creativity is the art of mixing existing ideas, genres, or themes to create something that feels original. Most creative breakthroughs don't come from inventing new parts, but from rearranging old ones in surprising ways. As Maria Popova summarized, to create is to combine existing bits of insight, knowledge, ideas, and memories into new material. We see this in how innovations often occur at intersections of fields. The smartphone is a combination of phone plus computer, plus camera, plus internet. Nothing wholly new, but the convergence was revolutionary. Let's say you want to write a new story, but everything feels overdone. So you combine a classic detective mystery with a medieval fantasy setting, creating a fresh tale where a grizzled investigator solves a murder in a castle ruled by magic and politics. The mental model of combinatorial creativity suggests that if you feed your mind with a rich array of source material, you can recombine them in novel ways. It reminds us that originality isn't about creating from scratch. It's about recombining what already works. Use this when you're stuck staring at a blank page, looking for a fresh angle, or trying to make your work stand out in a crowded space. Analogy and cross-domain transfer. Analogy and cross-domain transfer involve solving problems by borrowing ideas, patterns, or strategies from other fields. Instead of reinventing the wheel, you ask, where has something like this been solved before? What makes analogy potent is that it leverages an existing, well-understood system and maps it onto a new problem. In business, analogies are often used to brainstorm strategy. Uber for X has been a startup formula to applying the Uber ride-sharing model to other industries. Now imagine this. You're designing a better onboarding experience for your app. Instead of copying other software tools, you study how Disney designs theme park entrances, how they build anticipation, guide people intuitively, and create a magical first impression. That cross-industry insight leads to a standout user experience. Strategic thinkers don't just dig deeper, they look wider. If you want to think better and create smarter, don't limit yourself to your lane. Borrow brilliance wherever you find it. A lot of the ideas in Region 6 actually have deep historical roots. People have been using constraints to fuel creativity for centuries. Think of poets sticking to strict sonnet forms, or medieval architects building stunning cathedrals with limited materials. But it wasn't really framed in scientific terms until the mid-1900s, when psychologist J.P. Guilford started studying divergent thinking. In business, this idea really took off after high-pressure situations led to clever breakthroughs, like the Apollo 13 mission in 1970, where scarcity sparked some seriously creative problem-solving. Today, design thinking methods make setting constraints a core part of the process, and surveys show that managers now see constraints not as roadblocks but as creative fuel. There's the idea of combinatorial creativity. Arthur Koestler wrote about it in the 60s, and now it's even more relevant in the internet age where everyone's remixing everything. Analogy is another old tool that's gotten a modern upgrade. Ancient stories and scientific models used analogy all the time, but in the late 20th century, cognitive scientists started treating it as a real problem-solving method. These days, it's prevalent in some of the greatest technologies. Methods like TRIZ from Russia and thinkers like Douglas Hofstadter argue that analogy is basically how our brains think. Even AI is being trained to use analogy, as tools like ChatGPT rely on comparisons to help users understand ideas and generate new angles on a problem. Bottom line, the principles of Region 6, structured creativity and remixing ideas, are more important than ever. The world moves fast, old formulas stop working, and complex problems don't have obvious solutions. The edge goes to people and teams who can consistently invent new answers. As automation takes over the repetitive stuff, creativity becomes our superpower. That's why this domain isn't just useful, it's essential. Chapter 7. Region 7. Adaptive Execution and Strategic Agility. Adaptive execution and strategic agility is where strategy stops living on paper and starts moving in the real world. It's about turning plans into action and knowing how to adjust when things don't go as expected. In this domain, strategy isn't a fixed roadmap. It's a living process. You make a move, watch what happens, learn from it, and pivot if needed. The key skill here is agility. Being able to shift gears, course correct, or scale up quickly based on what reality throws your way. Instead of betting everything on one perfect plan, you treat each decision like a smart experiment, making progress through trial, feedback, and fast adjustments. This is where thinking meets doing, and where flexible execution beats rigid perfection. Whether you're launching something new, reacting to competition, or navigating change, adaptive execution helps you stay sharp, stay moving, and stay ahead. Strategy isn't a document. It's a rhythm of learning and adapting in real time. The OODA loop is the only mental model in this region. It is a 4-step decision cycle. Observe what's happening, orient yourself to the situation, decide on your next move, and act quickly. Then repeat, constantly adjusting based on new feedback. A dramatic example comes from air combat. Boyd, who formulated OODA, was a fighter pilot. He found that by training to observe an enemy's maneuvers and react almost instantly with the appropriate countermaneuver, he could defeat opponents even in inferior aircraft. Tech companies apply this through agile development, releasing beta versions, getting user data, updating the app frequently, which is OODA in action on a product scale. A contemporary example is how quickly some companies iterated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Restaurants that observed the lockdowns, oriented by assessing options, e.g. doing takeout, meal kits, etc., decided to reconfigure their operations and acted swiftly, kept themselves alive, often outperforming competitors that waited or were rigid. The OUDA loop emphasizes continuous situational awareness and response. It's almost like a dance. You never just set a strategy and forget it. You're constantly scanning, observing, recalibrating your understanding, orienting, making decisions, and implementing, then back to observing results. Use this when facing uncertainty, rapid change, or competitive pressure, especially when overthinking slows you down. The need to stay flexible and adapt isn't new. Sun Tzu was talking about it centuries ago in The Art of War. But the idea of putting structure around adaptability came later. The OODA loop, for example, was developed in the 50s and 60s by fighter pilot John Boyd. His core insight? In fast-moving situations, the winner is the one who can observe what's happening, make sense of it, decide and act faster than anyone else. Over time, that military concept made its way into different aspects of professional and personal life, where everything moves at lightning speed. The world changes so fast, whether it's tech disruption, global crises, or shifting social and cultural dynamics, that sticking to a rigid plan can kill a company. Think of Blockbuster or Kodak. They had plans, but didn't adapt when the world changed. Now look at Netflix or Amazon. They pivoted when the moment called for it, and it paid off big time. That's why agile thinking has gone mainstream. It's everywhere. Marketing, HR, even government projects are becoming more iterative and responsive. The idea of a learning organization is now more than just a buzzword. It's a survival strategy. Teams, entrepreneurs, and creators are encouraged to run experiments, learn from what works or doesn't, and keep evolving. It's not about perfect plans anymore, it's about continuous learning and adjusting. Even in your career, this matters. Jobs aren't linear ladders like they used to be. They're more like a jungle gym. The people who succeed are the ones who update their game plan often, try new things, and keep moving forward. In a world that won't slow down, the adaptive execution and strategic agility domain focuses on adaptive execution, helping you stay in the game and win. Real-world problems requiring multiple domains. To see these domains in action, consider a few complex real-world problems that demand tools from multiple regions on our strategy map. Global climate change. Solving climate change isn't just a science problem or a political issue, it's everything all at once. You need first principles thinking to really understand the basics of CO2 and rethink how we generate and use energy, like what if we rebuilt the power grid from scratch? Then you've got systems thinking in play because the climate is a massive interconnected web with tons of feedback loops, like melting ice making things even warmer. Even small changes can trigger big chain reactions, so second-order thinking really matters here. When it comes to making actual decisions, we have to weigh trade-offs like, should we invest in stopping climate change or adapting to it? That's classic decision dynamics. And we need to think in probabilities too, since a lot of this involves risk. What could happen, how bad it could get, and how certain we are about those outcomes. Smart strategies include treating tech investments like options for the future. Maybe direct air capture isn't perfect yet, but it might be soon. Now, zoom out to the global level and you're basically in a game theory situation. Countries don't want to act alone. They all want each other to fix the problem first. So we need to think in terms of incentives, alliances, and maybe even penalties to get everyone moving in the same direction. It's like a giant coordination puzzle. That's where storytelling matters too. If we can frame climate action as a win-win or something morally essential, it changes the game. But there's also the human brain to deal with. People tend to focus on short-term comfort over long-term risk, and they'll often ignore inconvenient facts. So, correcting those biases by making the problem feel real and local is a huge part of getting buy-in. On the flip side, creativity is helping us come up with wild new solutions like pulling carbon out of the air or inventing whole new green business models. Constraints like limited time and budget are actually sparking innovation. And of course, none of this is one and done. We have to stay flexible. Policies, tech, public opinion, it's all changing constantly. So countries and companies need to run a global OODA loop. Keep checking the data, adjusting plans, and staying ready to pivot. Climate change is one of the clearest examples of why we need a full stack of mental models. It takes everything from cold, hard data to deep emotional storytelling to even have a shot at solving it. Tech startup launching a disruptive product. Picture a startup launching a cutting-edge AI health device. To stand a chance, the founders aren't just relying on a good idea. They're pulling from a whole toolbox of strategic thinking. They kick things off with first principles thinking, stripping the problem, like diagnosing a specific condition, down to its basics and designing a solution from scratch, without copying how hospitals do it today. They use structured thinking to make sure their business model isn't missing anything, like who the real customers are, where the money will come from, and what it'll cost to deliver. Since healthcare is a giant, messy system, they bring in systems thinking next. They map out all the players, patients, providers, insurers, and think through how each one might react if their device catches on. Will it reduce hospital visits? What are the ripple effects? Will too much trust in the AI lead to other problems? They also use smart shortcuts like the 80-20 rule. Maybe just a few types of clinics will drive most of their early growth. Now throw in decision dynamics. Because they've only got so much money, every dollar counts. Should they spend it making the AI smarter or on getting it into more clinics? They might score features with something like rice to see which ideas have the biggest bang for the buck. They even hedge their bets. Most of the budget goes to safe bets, but a little is set aside for a crazy moonshot idea that might change the game. And because they work in fast cycles, every product update is a chance to pivot if needed. They're also thinking in terms of game theory. What happens if they succeed? Will a tech giant copy them? They run pre-mortems to imagine future failure and reverse engineer what could cause it, like not protecting their IP or growing fast enough. They prepare for different futures, like strict FDA rules or a loose regulatory climate. And when they pitch investors, they don't just show specs. They tell a powerful story about democratizing healthcare to build trust and excitement. On the cognitive side, they actively fight off biases. It's easy to get tunnel vision and ignore tough feedback when you love your own product. So they run bias checks regularly. What would make us admit we're wrong? They make space for diverse opinions too, like changing how meetings work so quiet voices actually get heard. That self-awareness, metacognition, becomes part of the culture. And of course, creativity is at the heart of everything. Maybe the whole idea came from comparing medical diagnostics to car engine lights, check body instead of a check engine. They host hackathons, test weird growth ideas, and stay open to happy accidents, like discovering the device works for a totally different use case than they expected. Finally, adaptive execution is their daily rhythm. They test, learn, and tweak constantly, release a beta version, gather feedback, adjust. They live in a constant loop of observing what's happening, making sense of it, deciding what to do, and acting fast. They combine all their thinking tools, creative when needed, analytical when it counts, and stay flexible. That's their edge. In a fast-changing world, the startups that thrive aren't the ones with a perfect plan. They're the ones that can think clearly and keep adapting. Public policy problem, urban traffic congestion. Let's say a city is drowning in traffic. Fixing it isn't just about building roads, it's about tech, behavior, infrastructure, and politics all rolled together. It's a big, messy puzzle that needs a smarter approach. First principles thinking kicks things off. Instead of just saying there are too many cars, planners ask, what's the real problem here? Maybe it's just that people need to get from point A to B efficiently. That simple shift opens up different solutions, like improving public transportation or encouraging people to live closer to work, instead of defaulting to building more highways. They break the problem into clear, non-overlapping pieces, commuter traffic, delivery trucks, street design, etc., to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. With systems thinking, they map how all the parts connect. For example, building more roads might temporarily ease traffic, but then people drive more. Development sprawls outwards, and the traffic comes roaring back. That's a classic feedback loop. They also think about the ripple effects. If they add congestion pricing, does it hurt low-income workers more? Could that lead to businesses relocating? Every solution causes a chain reaction, and they try to see where it all leads. Decision-making strategy matters too. Budgets are tight, so they compare the cost and benefit of different options. Do we widen roads, build subways, or just update our traffic light system? They think in terms of trade-offs. Is this land better used for a freeway or a park? They hedge their bets too, some low-risk, guaranteed wins like sinking lights, plus one bold idea like testing self-driving shuttles. Maybe they buy land now for a future train line, just in case they want to build it later. That's thinking ahead with optionality. Game theory comes in when juggling all the different players, drivers, politicians, business owners, transit riders. Everyone wants different things. The city might redesign tolls or carpool lanes to nudge behavior in the right direction. They run pre-mortems. It's 10 years later and our plan failed. Why? That helps surface blind spots early. And they invite critics, like outside transit experts, to poke holes in the plan before it's too late. Cognitive biases are a big hurdle. People hate change and often prefer the status quo, even if it's clearly not working. Officials overestimate how cheap or fast projects will be, so they build in a buffer. And they work to shift public perception too. Maybe people had one bad bus ride years ago and never tried again. So the city shares data and stories, showing how things have improved. Internally, they keep each other honest, remembering past mistakes like thinking more highways would magically fix everything. Creativity plays a huge role. One planner might compare traffic to internet data and wonder if algorithms used to route digital info could help move cars more efficiently. That sparks a smart traffic light system. Or maybe they launch citywide contests to crowdsource new ideas. Limited space forces creative thinking, like encouraging companies to stagger work hours or treating commuting like a subscription service, bundling public transit, bikes, and scooters into one app. Then there's adaptive execution, not betting the farm on one big fix, but testing small pilots first. Maybe they try out a bus-only lane on one street for 6 months. They observe the impact, gather feedback, tweak the rules, and scale it up if it works. If a new tech like e-scooters pops up, they don't ban it right away. They watch how it changes traffic, then fold it into their strategy. They adjust and iterate constantly, always updating based on real-world results. In the end, solving traffic isn't about finding one magic answer. It's about combining tools, engineering, economics, human behavior, and creativity, and keeping things flexible. That's why so many one-track solutions failed in the past. The cities that win are the ones that think across domains and keep adjusting as they go. Whether we're talking about climate change, launching a startup, or fixing city traffic, one thing's clear. You can't solve big problems with one way of thinking. Real-world challenges are layered and messy, so we need a strategy toolkit that's just as dynamic. That's where the map of strategy comes in, with 7 distinct but connected regions. It gives you options. When one approach hits a wall, you've got others to turn to. It also helps you think on multiple levels, breaking a problem down to its core, first principles, understanding how everything connects, systems thinking, weighing numbers and trade-offs, decision dynamics, anticipating reactions, game theory, managing mindsets, cognitive biases, sparking fresh ideas, creative models, and staying flexible when things change, adaptive execution. The strategist who can move between all these ways of thinking is way more equipped to handle complex problems than someone stuck using just one. Reflection and zoom out. The value of strategic thinking. Zooming out from our strategy tour, a bigger picture starts to take shape. Strategic thinking is really about seeing the world through multiple lenses, kind of like having a map with different layers you can switch between. Each mental model we covered gives you a different view, and the real magic happens when you can move between them, connect the dots, and figure out smarter ways forward. At its core, it's about accepting that the world is complex, and no single way of thinking is ever enough. There's a real emotional benefit to building this kind of mental map. First, you gain confidence. When a problem hits, you're not stuck in one way of thinking or frozen by uncertainty. You've got tools. You can break things down to basics, map out the system, brainstorm new angles. You don't feel helpless anymore. You trust your judgment more than ever. In a world that's constantly changing, that kind of flexibility becomes your secret weapon. Second, you get clarity. Complex situations stop feeling like a tangled mess. The fog starts to clear. You begin to name things. This might be a second-order effect, or maybe we're falling for confirmation bias, or this is starting to look like a competitive game. Just being able to name what's happening makes it feel way more manageable. It's like switching from a blurry photo to HD. You're still looking at the same scene, but now it makes sense. Third, it sparks creativity and curiosity. Weirdly enough, having a structure helps you explore more freely. When you know multiple ways to think, problem-solving becomes less of a chore and more like a puzzle. You start saying things like, what if we flip this idea upside down? Or is there an analogy from another field that applies here? And when you start thinking like that, solutions get a lot more interesting and fun. Beyond that, strategic thinking builds a kind of wisdom. You realize every model has its limits, so you stay humble. But you also feel bold because you're not flying blind. You're equipped. Over time, you start to spot patterns across fields, like how something in nature might spark a breakthrough idea. It's satisfying, and it changes how you see the world. Emotionally, it builds resilience. Things that would have knocked you down now just feel like feedback. A failed idea? Just more data. You trust your process, so even when stuff goes sideways, you keep moving. That mindset is gold, especially when life or business throws curveballs. It also gives you a real sense of purpose and agency. You're not just reacting to life, you're playing the game. You're not in full control, no one is, but you're definitely driving. When you use these models to crack a tough problem, there's a deep satisfaction. It's that feeling of using your brain at full power, like an athlete hitting flow state, but with thinking. At the end of the day, this map of strategy isn't just a framework, it's a mindset and a habit. Each region adds a new layer to how you operate, but using them together changes the game entirely. You go from being reactive to intentional, from seeing the world in one dimension to seeing it in surround sound. And here's the best part. It makes life feel less like a chaotic mess and more like a mission you're equipped to handle. Strategic thinking gives you the tools to stay calm in chaos, stay curious in uncertainty, and stay confident when things get tough. It lets you become the hero of your own story, problem by problem, decision by decision, leaving a trail others can follow. And in a world that's only getting more complex, that kind of thinking might be one of the most powerful things you can learn. So that's the point of the map of strategy. You don't need hundreds of models. You need a small, reliable toolkit you actually use. The 1% win because they run the right models consistently until clear thinking becomes automatic. Here's how to put this video to work today. Pick one real decision on your plate this week. Run it through 3 passes. First principles. What must be true? What can I prove, not assume? Second order thinking. If this works, what happens because it worked? If it fails, what breaks next? Inversion. If I wanted the worst outcome, what would I do and how do I avoid those moves? Commit the answer to a single step you'll take in the next 24 hours. Use the map to choose other tools as needed, probabilities for uncertainty, game theory when opponents react, feedback loops for execution. Depth beats breadth, reps beat trivia, and a small set used well will keep you from creating new problems while you solve old ones. If this helped, save the video and share it with one person who makes big decisions or a friend who is having a hard time making one. Tell me in the comments which model you'll use this week. I'll read and reply. And if you want the full written report of the map of strategy, say map and I'll publish it.